Okay, I will be reading and annotating James Joyce's Araby. And yes, it's Araby, and it takes me a while to say that. So if it takes you a while to, that's okay. All right, so we start with North Richmond Street. Being blind was a quiet street, except at the hour when the Christian Brothers schools set the boys free. An uninhabited house of 2 stories stood at the blind end, detached from its neighbors in a square ground. The other houses at the street, conscious of decent lives within them, gazed at one another with brown, imperturbable faces. Okay, so blind is going to mean a dead end. I would have thought it just meant quiet, but this is actually a term used for dead end streets. So, and dead end would mean if you have to turn around, there's like no where else to go when you get to the end of the street. Now, we also know we're describing things as brown faces. Well, he's talking about the houses and kind of the people, but we'll get into this. All right. So we have the former tenant of our house, a priest, had died in the back drawing room. Air, musty from having been long enclosed, hung in all the rooms, and the waste room behind the kitchen was littered with old, useless papers. Among these I found a few paper-covered books, the pages of which were curled and damp: The Abbot by Walter Scott, The Devout Communicant, and The Memoirs of Vidocq. I liked the last best because its leaves were yellow. The wild garden behind the house contained a central apple tree, and a few straggling bushes, under of which I found the late tenant's rusty bicycle pump. He had been a very charitable priest. In his will he had left all his money to institutions and the furniture of his house to his sister. An apple tree would be important because that's symbolic to the Garden of Eden. And also, we're going to notice now that it's a narrator. Our narrator is a boy, a school age boy. Here's our apple tree. And anytime you have um, a story about a childhood, so apple tree, symbolism, you could even say allusions. Oh, all those would be allusions, biblical. Those, the abbot and the devout, those would be religious books, obviously, because it's a priest. So now we have our setting, and this boy, the tenant would be someone who rents the house, was a priest, but now he's dead. All right. When the short days of winter came, dusk fell before we had well eaten our dinners. When we met in the street, the houses had grown somber. The space of sky above us was the color of ever-changing violet towards it. The lamps of the street lifted their feeble lanterns. The cold air stung us, and we played till our bodies glowed. Our shouts echoed in the silent street. The career of our play brought us through the dark, muddy lanes behind the houses, where we ran the gauntlet of the rough tribes from the cottages to the back doors of the dark, dripping gardens, where odors arose from the ash pits, to the dark, odorous stables, where a coachman smoothed and combed the horse, or shook music from the buckled harness. When we returned to the street, light from the kitchen windows had filled the areas. If my uncle was seen turning the corner, we hid the shadow until we had seen him safely housed. Or if Manga's sister came out on the doorstep to call her brother in to his tea, we watched her from the shadow peer up and down the street. We waited to see whether she would remain or go in, and if she remained, we left our shadow and walked up to Manga's steps resignedly. She was waiting for us, her figure defined by the light from the half-open door. Her brother always teased her before he obeyed, and I stood by the railings looking at her. Her dress swung, and she moved her body, and the soft rope of her hair tossed from side to side. Now we're getting into our conflict. But wait, we want to say, if we didn't know when James Joyce published a story, which was a turn of the 1900s, so start of the 1900s, if we didn't know that, he's in like stables, right? Odorous would mean smelly, and there's coachman. So like a coachman would be kind of like a taxi that uh, is a buggy, has a horse and buggy. So we know he's not talking about modern technology. All right. And we get into the conflict, the sister. Every morning I lay on the floor in the front parlor watching her door. The blind was pulled down to within an inch of the sash so that I could not be seen. When she came out on the doorstep, my heart leaped. I ran to the hall, seized my books, and followed her. I kept her brown figure always in my eye, and when we came near the point at which our ways diverged, I quickened my pace and passed her. This happened morning after morning. I had never spoken to her except for a few casual words, and yet her name was like a summons to my foolish blood. Like a summons, that'd be figurative language. Her image accompanied me even in places most hostile to romance. On Saturday evenings, when my aunt went marketing, I had to go carry some of the parcels. We walked through the flaring streets, jostled by drunken men and bargaining women, amid the curses of laborers, the shrill litanies of shop boys who stood on guard by the barrels of pigs' cheeks, the nasal chanting of street singers who sang Come All You about O Donovan Rosa, or a ballad about the troubles in our native land. These noises converged in a single sensation of life for me. I imagined that I bore my chalice safely through a throng of foes. Her name sprang to my lips at moments in strange prayers and praises which I myself did not understand. That's important to his characterization. My eyes were often full of tears, I cannot tell why, and at times a flood from my heart seemed to pour itself out into my bosom. I thought little of the future. I did not know whether I would speak to her or not, or if I spoke to her, how I could tell her of my confused adoration. But my body was like a harp, and her words and gestures were like fingers running upon the wires. All right, this tells us a lot. This is like shows us he's a kid, right? He's even admitting that he's confused. He doesn't understand why he is so obsessed with this girl. Characterization of a confused young boy. We could say prepubescent. Wait, I can't see. Prepubescent would mean like between 11 and 14. All right, so then we also have the troubles about the native land. This is going to be Ireland, and this would be the troubles was the term they would use British colonization, and there'll be a video on that too. Um, so sometimes in a story, you might not understand exactly where or when or the context until you're kind of we're in the rising action at this point. And also, parcels is a bag, so you wouldn't that would be like a British kind of term. All right, here we go. One evening, I went into the back drawing room in which the priest had died. This part's the priest is symbolic too, and I'll put that there. The priest had died because the priest obviously sin, things like that. And he has this crush on this girl. Okay. It was a dark, rainy evening, and there was no sound in the house. Through one of the broken panes, I heard the rain impinge upon the earth, the fine, incessant needles of water playing in the sodden beds. Some distant lamp or lighted window gleamed below me. I was thankful that I could see so little. All my senses seemed to desire to veil themselves, and feeling that I was about to slip from them, I pressed the palms of my hands together until they trembled, murmuring, oh, love, many times. At last she spoke to me. When she addressed the first words to me, I was so confused that I did not know what to answer. She asked me, was I going to Araby? I forget whether I answered yes or no. It would be a splendid bazaar, she said. She would love to go. And why can't you? I asked. While she spoke, she turned a silver bracelet round and round her wrist. She could not go, she said. Oops. Oh no, hold on. Oh wait. Oh. She could not go, she said. There would be a retreat that week in her convent. Her brother and two other boys were fighting for their caps, and I was alone at the railings. She held one of the spikes, bowing her head towards me. The light from the lamp opposite our door caught the white curve of her neck, lit up her hair that rested there, and falling lit the hand upon the railing. It fell over one side of her dress, caught the white border of a petticoat just visible as she stood at ease. He's like watching her very closely. He's nervous. A convent is a place where nuns go. She may be training to be a nun, but he also goes to a Catholic boys' school. So in Ireland, it was common, but quite possibly. Okay, and nuns would have been celibate. What innumerable. Oh, wait, sorry. The light. Her brother caught the window. It's well for you, she said. If I go, I will bring you something. Here we go. Rising action. He has agreed he's going to bring her something, even though she didn't ask. What innumerable follies lay waste. Innumerable follies, many mistakes, and annoying things he had to do. Laid waste my waking and sleeping thoughts after that evening. I wish to annihilate the tedious intervening days. I chafed against the work of school at night in my bedroom and by day in the classroom. Her image came between me and the page I strove to read. The syllables of the word Araby were Araby, see, Araby was called to me through the silence in which my soul luxuriated and cast an Eastern enchantment over me. I asked for leave to go to the bazaar on Saturday night. My aunt was surprised and hoped it was not some Freemason affair. I answered few questions in class. I watched my master's face pace from amiability to sternness. He hoped I was not beginning to idle. I could not call my wandering thoughts together. I had hardly any patience with the serious work of life, which now that it stood between me and my desire, seemed me child's play, ugly, monotonous child's play. On Saturday morning I reminded my uncle that I wished to go to the bazaar in the evening. He was fussing at the halstead looking for the brush, and answered me curtly, Yes, boy, I know. As he was in the hall, I could not go into the front parlor and lie at the window. I left the house in bad humor and walked slowly towards the school. The air was pitilessly raw, and already my heart misgave me. When I came home to dinner, my uncle had not yet been home. Still, it was early. I sat staring at the clock for some time. When its ticking began to irritate me, I left the room. I mounted the staircase and gained the upper part of the house. The high, cold, empty, gloomy rooms liberated me, and I went from room to room singing. From the front window, I saw my companions playing below in the street. Their cries reached me weakened and indistinct, and leaning my forehead against the cool glass, I looked over at the dark house where she lived. I may have stood there for an hour, seeing nothing but the brown clad figure gasped by my imagination, touched discreetly by the lamplight at the curved neck, at the hand upon the railings, and at the border mood below the dress. Now, this is mood. He's watching his friends, even though they're playing, and obviously he should be out playing, not doing this. But so the mood, he's getting kind of anxious. When I came downstairs again, I found Mrs. Mercer sitting at the fire. She was an old, garrulous woman, a pawnbroker's widow, who collected used stamps for some pious purpose. I had to endure the gossip of the tea table. The meal was prolonged beyond an hour, and still my uncle did not come. Mrs. Mercer stood up to go. She was sorry she couldn't wait any longer, but it was after 8 o'clock, and she did not like to be out late, as the night air was bad for her. When she had gone, I began to walk up and down the room, clenching my fists. My aunt said, I'm afraid you may put off your bazaar for this night of our Lord. At 9 o'clock, I heard my uncle's latchkey in the hall door. I heard him talking to himself, and heard the hall stand rocking when it had received the weight of his overcoat. I could interpret these signs. When he was midway through the dinner, I asked him to give me the money to go to the bazaar. He had forgotten. The people are in bed and after their first sleep now, he said. I did not smile. My aunt said to him energetically, Can't you give him the money and let him go? You've kept him late enough as it is. My uncle said he was very sorry he had forgotten. He said he believed the old saying, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. He asked me where I was going, and when I had told him a second time, he asked me did I know the Arab's farewell to his steed. When I left the kitchen, he was about to recite the opening lines and the pieces to my aunt. This is supposed to mean the uncle was like drunk and forgetting things, and also all work and no play is like something people say when they want to be partying. And the Mrs. Garrulous part, this random lady, Mrs. Mercer, a pawnbroker's wife. Like pawnbrokers might have been known to be kind of like not criminals, but like cheap. And her collecting the stamps, she's supposed to add to the annoyance. Like our narrator at this point is very annoyed. There's this lady, he has to listen. A tea table gossip is like when women would gossip. Endure means he's like suffering through it. So, all right, here we go. I held the floor tightly in my hands as I strode down Buckingham Street towards the station. The sight of the streets, thronged with buyers and glaring with gas, recalled me to the purpose of my journey. I took my seat in a third class carriage out of a deserted train. After an intolerable delay, the train moved out of the station slowly. It crept onward among ruinous houses and over the twinkling river. At Westland Row Station, a crowd of people pressed to the carriage doors, but the porters moved them back. Porters are people who work on trains, saying that it was a special train for the bazaar. I remained alone in the bare carriage. In a few minutes, the train drew up beside an improvised wooden platform. I passed out on the road and saw by the lighted dial of a clock that it was 10 minutes to 10. In front of me was a large building which displayed the magical name. I could not find any sixpenny entrance, that's just their currency, fearing that the bazaar would be closed. I passed in quickly through a turnstile, handing a shilling to a wary looking man. I found myself in a big hall girdled at half its height by a gallery. Nearly all the stalls were closed, and the greater part of the hall was in darkness. I recognized a silence like that which pervades a church after a service. I walked into the center of the bazaar timidly, scared, nervous. A few people were gathered about the stalls, which were still open, but a curtain over which the words Café Chantant were written in colored lamps. Two men were counting money on a salver. I listened to the fall of the coins. Remembering with difficulty why I had come, I went over to one of the stalls and examined porcelain vases and flowered tea sets. At the door of the stall, a young lady was talking and laughing with two young gentlemen. I remarked their English accents and vaguely to their conversation. Listen vaguely. Vaguely means like kind of, not really. Oh, I never said such a thing. Oh, but you did. But I didn't. Didn't she say that? Yes, I heard her. Oh, there's a fib. A fib would be like a lie. This is flirting. So, flirtatious. And we could say this would be the flirtatiousness of these would be people like 3 or 4 years older than him, maybe even longer, early 20s, almost adults, teenagers maybe. Observing me, the young lady came over and asked me, did I wish to buy anything? The tone of her voice was not encouraging. She seemed to have spoken to me out of a sense of duty. I looked humbly at the great jars that stood like Eastern guards at either side of the dark entrance of the stall and murmured, no, thank you. The young lady changed the position of one of the vases and went back to the two young men. They began to talk of the same subject. Once or twice the lady glanced at me over her shoulder. I lingered before her stall, though I knew my stay was useless, to make my interest in her wares seem more real. Then I turned away slowly and walked down the middle of the bazaar. I allowed the 2 pennies to fall against the 6 pennies in my pocket. I heard a voice call from the one end of the gallery that the light was out. The upper part of the hall was now completely dark. Gazing up into the darkness, I saw myself as a creature driven and derided by vanity, and my eyes burned with anger, anguish, and anger. Okay, so basically, it starts like, it's weird when he doesn't remember why he was there, when he's been obsessed with it this entire story. And now, as soon as he gets there, he doesn't remember what he's there for. We could say it could then start with this conversation. Maybe he sees how people who are friends actually talk. And then maybe he's starting to notice that he doesn't even talk to this girl. So, like, he doesn't even know her. Why is he buying her something? Maybe. This is my interpretation because we don't know what causes this. Because then, the tone of her voice was not encouraging. She spoke to me out of a sense of duty. That would be basically like all salespeople because she works there. A sense of duty would mean that she works there. Obviously, that's why she's talking to him. But for him, now he's like realizing maybe he doesn't understand how social interactions work. And humbly means like shyly or just not with a lot of pride. No, thank you, he says. All right. So when he's lingering and he says his stay is useless, he's not going to buy anything, but he's saying just to make her his interest in her wares. Wares would be like the goods she's selling at the store. He doesn't want to just like walk away. Now he feels awkward. So he's standing there looking before he leaves. Slowly, he's like walking. We could say when the lights turn off, that could be symbolism that maybe it represents his childhood being over, this experience having this crush. Um, this first crush has died out. And did it ever really exist at all? That's up for interpretation from you guys. Um, the lights going out, we could say, represent the end of something, your interpretation. And then we could have the final. Okay, derided would mean to come from. And vanity would mean like obsessive pride in something, like arrogance, materialism. Materialism being like really concerned with stuff, goods. So he's saying he sees himself as this person that is just driven by desires or excessive pride or excessive uh, whatever he's trying to say. He just doesn't understand. But vanity would be an excessive of something, excessive love. He loved too hard, and he needs to maybe slow down and do things in moderation. He is anguished and angered. So he's mad at himself here. Anguish would be like mad, anxiety, resentment, everything kind of rolled into one. And that is the end. And he has an epiphany, a change of heart. That would be what you call an epiphany. So, and you it would interpret what caused this. What is the story about?